Basem Hanna, welcome to Viltso Radio.
Thanks, John. Thank you so much for having me.
How did you get into the weed business? That's what I want to know.
Oh, man. Well, beyond my love for it in university. The story is actually quite interesting. Maybe I'll give you a bit of history, just like I said.
Yeah, please.
What happened. From a schooling perspective, I did an undergraduate business degree at Western at the Richard Ivey School of Business. I graduated and I went straight into management consulting at BCG. Worked in their UK office. Realized very quickly that management consulting is an excellent profession that requires top tier talent, which I was not suited for. And then I made a more life or realistic jump to say what I really want to do is when I was growing up, maybe backtracking more, growing up, I didn't come from a lot of money. So money was a very big motivator for me in like really everything that I did. That's both a good and a bad, as I'm sure anybody who has gone through that journey will know. And I came to the conclusion after management consulting, and like the richest people that I know own real estate and they get distributed cash flows every month from real estate. And I know we're talking about cannabis, but they all connect. So I went into real estate right after my stint at BCG. I got a really entry-level job at a very good company called First Capital Realty. I was in their acquisitions and development team for about 2.5 years. Grew up in that industry, loved it, had great mentors in that company. Then I actually went on and at 24, I quit that job and I tried to start my own real estate fund. Did not work out because I didn't know everything I needed to know. Story for another day. Went back to real estate and worked for a private equity shop called the Rose Corporation for another 2 years, rounded out the skills that I didn't have leaving First Cap. And then in 2011, I started my own real estate fund, raising money from family and friends, and just trying to grow our community's kind of legacy or generational wealth. I'm a Coptic Christian Egyptian. We are all very much first generation immigrants. Like my parents and I came to Canada when I was 5 years old. And most Coptic Christian Egyptians kind of immigrated to Canada in like the mid 80s, early 90s and onwards, right? So we don't have like that legacy. I had a grandfather who built this and did that and whatever. That's not our story. So the vision on my end when I was younger and still to this day is, well, no one's going to do this for us. We got to pool our money together. We got to get organized and we got to start doing bigger things together than we could do alone. And that was really my guiding principle into starting Almega, which is my real estate fund. And the purpose was to buy income producing assets that we could renovate and hold for long-term cash flow. So in 2011, we bought our first building. That was a 9-unit apartment building. Then we bought a 12-unit apartment building, then a 20-unit apartment building, and on and on and on. And thankfully, it's just because we were working really hard and we were working that business to a point where more people started to believe in us. Word of mouth was a really good thing for us. And then in 2013, I was like, okay, we've done really well in apartments. We own like 50, 60 units now, and we've gone through a bunch of renovation cycles. And like, it's time for us to get into a different asset class of real estate, and I want to get into self-storage. So I bought an industrial building, a vacant industrial building in Mississauga, where I'm from, 70,000 square feet, and the purpose was to convert it to self-storage. During my closing dinner for that with my lawyers, as most people know, if you buy a property and you spend a lot on legals, they tend to take you out for a really fancy dinner. So during that dinner, I was asking my lawyer, I'm like, hey, what does your husband do for a living? Just casual conversation. She's like, actually, he just quit his job and he's getting into medical cannabis. This is August 2013. And I was like everything in my business school / case studies / like consulting, like, oh my gosh, like what is this? Like if they're going to legalize cannabis, it's going to be, I want to be a first mover. I want to get in there. At this time I'm 26, 27, and everybody is telling me I'm too young to do anything major.
And Basem, just orient me here and our listeners, most of whom are in the United States, where state by state, cannabis is legal in some and not in others. So in 2013 in Ontario, is cannabis I think it's maybe legal for medical purposes, but not recreational. Have I got that right? A timeline? Just give me the sense.
Not quite. So in 2013, they announced a federal medical legalization program. So countrywide, not province wide. That was going to kick in April 2014. So we heard about something that was happening 9 months later, and so I all of my spidey senses started tingling, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I think this is something really cool. And the beauty about the business that we built up to that point in real estate is it's income producing, it's cash flowing, but it's passive. Unless I'm going out and I'm buying new real estate and I'm growing the business, it doesn't really require that much of my time outside of property management day to day. So I talk to my wife and I read the legislation. I read the legislation or the proposed legislation for cannabis. I literally went home from that meeting and it was the only thing I could think about. Or that closing dinner is the only thing I could think about. It was nonstop replaying in my head. And so I'm like, okay, I got to see what's going on. So and I'm not this guy. I Google, I'm proposed legalization of medical cannabis, and I get this draft legislation. And so I read the legislation, again, also something I don't normally do. And I'm like, holy smokes, this is going to happen. And then the obvious comparisons start to kick in. I'm like, this is the Bacardi family or the Smirnoff family in the early 20s when Prohibition ended. And you just got to I'm like, I just want to get in there and be first mover, and I'll figure it out. I think I've got a good enough head on my shoulders. I can surround myself with the right people. So let's try. So first thing I do is I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about distribution. I'm a pretty low level, analyst associate now. I've just started my own business. But I don't have connects like that. So I call one of my investors in my real estate fund, whose family supported me from the very beginning. And I'm like, hey, I want to get into this space. They're in the pharmacy business, the retail pharmacy business. And I was for sure thinking that medical cannabis was going to get distributed like every other drug in a pharmacy. So I'm like, would you consider doing this with me? And then maybe we can have a distribution platform through your stores. And the son, who's my co-founder in TerrAscend, Michael Nashit, he's like, absolutely. We start brainstorming and going back and forth and asking these questions to each other, seeing if we could poke holes. And we're like, you know what? This could work. And then he's like, but we're going to need somebody on the government relations side. And neither of us had that. And so he had a friend named Vijay Sapani, who became our third co-founder. So the three of us in January 2024, we each put $50,000 into a bank account. And we said, this is going to be our seed capital. And we're going to go ahead and try to start this business.
How'd you guys divvy up the equity among the three of you? Just a third, a third, a third?
Yeah, exactly. Just a third, a third, a third. And we used the building that we had just purchased, that industrial building that was going to be turned to self-storage. We said, well, this could be an excellent location to put the address for this proposed cannabis production facility. The way that the license, just as a FYI to the listeners, the way that the licenses worked in the beginning was you had to be seed to sale. You had to be full operational. So you had to grow the plant, manufacture it, process it, package it, sell it, ship it. That's how
totally vertically integrated.
Full vertical integration.
Wow.
And the security was out of this world. So we're like, okay, well, let's use our facility. And in the application process, the biggest hurdle that everybody had was you had to have a city that would approve your use. Your local city had to approve the fact that you were going to be doing medical cannabis. And you had to have a landlord, or you had to own the building and they would have to approve it as well. So because we own the building, that was easy. With the city stuff, the city of Mississauga is the second or third largest city in Canada. We grew up here. Myself and Michael grew up here, and we had a good relationship with Hazel McCallion, who was the mayor at the time. She's just for those who don't know, she's a long-standing mayor. She's probably
900 years old.
Yeah, she's the best mayor ever. And so we went into her office and we're like, Hazel, listen, here's, and we wrote a business plan for her. We're like, here's what we want to do, this. But our rate limiting step is going to be that we need this to get approved at council. And unless we so we're asking you first. So she sits us down, Mike and I, in her room, and she knows us. She's known us since we were kids. And she's like, boys, I want to tell you something. She's like, I hate cannabis. I don't like drugs, but I trust you to do it professionally. Make sure you employ people from Mississauga and pay your taxes, and I'll approve you. And she gave us a site-specific exemption for our site to allow us to go ahead and do this.
Wait, how did you get to know the mayor? You said you knew her from when you were a kid.
Yeah.
How did you know her?
It's actually through church, if you could believe it. Our Hazel was such an active mayor in our city. So she would show up at every Christmas, every Easter, every event, every whatever. So she'd recognize you. And I've been going to that church since I was like 5 or 6. So she knows who we are. Like maybe she doesn't know exactly who we are. She's like, I've seen you grow up.
That's wild. And again, for my listeners, Hazel McCallion is this larger than life figure. She was the mayor of Mississauga for literally decades upon decades upon decades. I think she's now retired. She passed away in her late 90s. I think she was in her 90s. She was still in her 90s as the mayor of this city. Is like an unbelievable story. And she was able to. So again, if you're not from Mississauga, you don't know the story of Hazel McCallion. She's an incredible lady who engendered an incredible loyalty. So keep going. This is amazing. So Hazel kind of slaps you on the wrist and says, "Okay, but if you're going to do it, you pay your taxes, and I'll support you."
so that was like that's when we knew we had something. So 2014 we make the application. Now that we've got all of our I's dotted and T's crossed, and then we go into like limbo. Like we make the application and Health Canada, they don't respond to you. There's no phone call. There's no emails. You can't do anything. We flew down to Ottawa to just like try to knock on a door to see if somebody like, hey, have you even received our application? So 2014 goes by. We don't hear anything except for like, we've acknowledged that we've received your application. Fantastic. 2015 goes by, nothing.
What are you guys doing for money during this time?
Literally bleeding cash. And the only way that I could get our investors behind us using this facility for cannabis was I said, okay, we're going to rent it out personally. Instead of using it as self-storage, we're going to rent it out personally, and we will pay you the returns as if it was being operated as self-storage. So we're paying rent into this thing every month to our investors.
Because you didn't buy the 70,000 square foot facility with your own cash. You had investors, and that you were promising them a return. We're going to rent it out as self-storage. And so they're expecting checks. And all of a sudden you're writing the checks.
Like we don't have a choice. We gave it to them. So that 50,000 that we each put in, it bled like within the first 4 months of us coming in. And then I started asking some individual family and friends if they, you guys want to invest 25,000 seed capital, 30,000 seed capital, whatever we can get just to get the rent paid. And because we were waiting, there wasn't anything to do. We knew that eventually we would have to build out a facility, and that was going to require a big equity raise. That number was $6 million. But we were like, we're not even going to start raising this until Health Canada gives us, in the licensing process, there was a ready to build letter that you would get that says, okay, we've reviewed your application, we've done your security checks, you can go ahead and build the facility and we'll come inspect it, and if it's good, you'll get your license. But that took forever to get. So we got that in 2016. And then from 2016, the world kind of went like into hyperdrive, right? Because beyond us getting our letter, the cannabis industry at large was starting to get a lot more attention. Like think in 2014, when we first set out to do this, people thought we were insane, right? Like the cannabis wasn't what it is now. It was like very, very taboo. And it's like, oh, you're a drug dealer. I'm like, well, I mean, yes, but like the good kind. So we 2016 hits, we get our ready to build letter, and we start going out to build, and we raised $6 million from family and friends, right? And it was probably the hardest capital we'd ever had to raise. And it was just to build the production room, the shipping facility, like basically like version 1.0 of our facility, which would just give us the bare minimum we need to do that vertically integrated process, one of each kind of room.
What kind of valuation did you put on the company at that time to raise the $6 million?
I think we did like a $6 million at a like $10 million pre-money valuation. Like we diluted ourselves pretty heavy.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but we needed it. It was either that or zero, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then we built out the first phase of our facility. But obviously, like, you have to understand, I was 28 now, 28, turned 29, and I was tapped to be the CEO of the business strictly because Mike and VJ both had full-time jobs, and I was I was very vested in this, and I had the construction and renovation and real estate experience. So like, even if in like the first phase of this thing's life, I was going to be the guy that probably had the most experience out of the three of us to do it. So they tapped me to be the CEO. So raise the capital, build out phase one of the facility. And just in terms of square footage, we built out 12,000 of our 70,000 square foot facility. The rest are just kind of sitting vacant. We do all of that. And then we finally get we're starting to get our inspections and approvals. And I'm like, oh crap, we ran out of money, right? Like, everything is like, that 6 million was basically what our contractor said it was going to cost, not including overages or overhead or whatever it was. We're like, we'll figure that out later. Very bootstrapped. We go through it. We start to realize we need more money, but now we have attention, because if you look up who they're ready to build or who's in the licensing process, you can see, and we're really early on. So I started to connect with investment bankers, with advisors, with like all the accounting firms that wanted to work with these up and coming cannabis companies. And they would start making introductions for me. One thing leads to another, and we get introduced to a hedge fund who was like, okay, we're going to give you $10 million on this convertible note structure, which at the time I'd never heard of.
Explain what a convertible note is.
So a convertible note is basically, they're going to give you a loan, and if you meet certain criteria, they can convert it into equity, either by their choice or because you've met so many of the criteria that you can convert it, like you can force them to convert. And normally it works like, if they convert before you force them to convert, it's at valuation X. And if you can force them to convert, you get valuation Y. So there's motivation for you to work faster to achieve the mutually agreed upon goals that you're trying to achieve. And because it's a hedge fund, the hedge funds don't normally play in private markets. They typically play in private markets with the expectation that they're going to go public shortly. And because the cannabis industry was going through its like crazy go public phase in 2016, early 2017, we were like right place, right time, well equipped, well informed. So it all kind of like came together really nicely. So these guys gave us the money we need. They gave us $10 million, and they gave us that money in April or May of 2017. And they're like, if you get your they gave us that money in January 2017. And they're like, if you go public, your interest rate on the money will drop from 15% to 6%. So immediate motivation to go public. And then they're like, also, if you get your license from before July 31st, 2017, your company will be valued at 75 cents a share versus 50 cents a share, which is a big like delta for us. And if you trade if you go public and you get your license and you trade at a certain dollar volume, I think it was like $1.10 for more than 10 days, then you can force convert us into equity and you have no more debt on your books.
So they were really structuring this because they wanted you to go public, to become a publicly traded company. And this is well before you have any revenue, presumably, right? You're just still building it out.
Yeah, we don't even have the ability to make revenue.
I was going to say, like, how does a company with no revenue go public?
I mean, listen, these are all great autopsy questions for why the cannabis industry imploded. But we were very confident in what we could do. And the one thing that we did before we started taking on serious money is we went out and we saw, at that point, a few companies had started to go public. So Canopy had gone public, Aurora had gone public, MedRelief had gone public. So we made it a point to go meet the founders and go see their facilities, because we were really intimidated by these guys. Like, these guys have $300, $400, $500 million valuations on the stock market. We're like, well, how are they so different than we are? Like, I feel like we're in the same spot. And we would go see their facilities, be like, oh, they're not. Like, they're exactly where we are, maybe like one step ahead of us. so that gave us a lot of confidence to be like, well, listen, we don't know where this industry is going, but one piece of advice that I was given early on is like, you eat while you can eat, because you don't know when
coming.
Yeah. So we're like, we took that confidence that we got from visiting their facilities, and we're like, we'll figure it out later. And we have all of our financial models and projections said that we were going to make a crazy ton of money and yada yada yada. So we plowed on. So
it's funny. I got to pause here and just kind of make a personal observation. I wonder if you similar yourself. It feels very much like 2024 AI, where these early in the kind of world of AR, people are just making these massive bets. There's no monetization yet. I mean, I guess ChatGPT is monetized to some extent, but like it's all on the future, right? It's like, what is AI going to be in 10 years? I want to get in on the ground floor. You guys are pre-revenue and talking kind of $100 million valuation. This is crazy.
Wild. And like, very limited capital markets experience. I run my own real estate fund before, but outside of that, I had no executive level experience. So really trial by fire. But it was a crazy time, and we were like, if they can do it, we can do it. So let's just keep going. So to give you like the most important chronology, we agreed to take the money from the hedge fund in like say January of 2017, March 2017. We take the company public strictly because I want to reduce their debt load on us, because that burn killed us.
Right, 15 to 6%.
Yeah, right. On $10 million, right? So it's not nothing for a very small company. Then we get our license, and we get our preliminary license in like mid-July. So we meet that criteria, and we force convert, and then our stock pops a little bit, and we force convert them in August. So that was like a very fast, hard and fast life lessons learned galore in those 6 months. And then we
so in August, when you force convert, just so I understand this, and this is probably going beyond my pay grade, but when you take $10 million of debt, and then you force convert, meaning they have to convert that to equity.
Yeah.
They are buying that equity. Are you issuing new shares, or are they buying it from the shareholders?
Dilution. We're issuing new shares. It's at the company's option, because we could pay the debt down and save the shares, but in our mind, we're a pre-revenue company, and they're giving us like a $70 million valuation at 75 cents. We're like, just like do it. And we talked to we had thank goodness we had really, really good board members. We had the chief of staff and head of cardiology at Dr. Gopal Bhatnagar at Trillium. We had the former CFO of Loblaws. It was like that. I can honestly tell you that at those critical moments, the advice that they gave us was so profound to like young entrepreneurs that like forever, like we will be forever.
How'd you get those big hitters on your board?
Word of mouth and connection, right? Like at that time, the cannabis world was attracting everybody, right? And everybody kind of wanted their piece. Again, like think like 2024 AI. If what you think is an up and coming AI company is like, hey, you want to sit on our board and everything kind of checks out, you're like, yeah, sure, I'll throw my name on there. And I think the relationships are great. We still talk to every single one of our board members, and they're fantastic. We love them.
So were you down? I mean, I'm just doing the math here. So you the friends and family raise at a $10 million valuation, then the 10 million gets converted. Like, you and Michael and VJ, are you down to single digits at this point, or are you still able to help?
Sorry, you just reminded me. So we did the 6 million at an $18 million valuation. It was a third of our company, and then we did the hedge fund money it ended up being at a $60 million convert. At that point, I think VJ, Mike, and I still own like a third of the business collectively, or maybe just over a third.
Yep.
So we're still sitting pretty healthy. We're on paper. We now look like we're millionaires, which was something I was very new and nice to feel. Although you can't really monetize that, so it didn't matter. And then in August, so like the craziest part, and this is, I guess, the thing that I believe the listeners here would really appreciate is like that sales process. So we get to August, we've just kind of like climbed the mountain, and then our CFO comes out to me and she's like, "We're gonna run out of money in a month." I'm like, "Come on, like again? Like we just did this." But the industry is moving really quickly, and our stock is starting to pick up some momentum. And so I'm like, okay, I want to go out and I want to raise a big amount of money. I'm going to raise like $25 million so that we don't have to worry about cash anymore. We now have like we were the 51st license in Canada. And we were probably like the 10th public company. So we were pretty early days. And we had a reputation, and we went to all the conferences and we did the whole schmoozy thing. So I'm like, I think we can do this. So we go out and we try to raise capital. And again, through one of our mutual connections, they introduced us to this US private equity firm led by a gentleman named Jason Wild, who'd been doing a lot of passive investments in cannabis, and he'd done extremely well. But his criticism was one that we shared, which was this is going to be way bigger in the US than it is in Canada, and the Canadian operators aren't really running it the way that US operators would run it. And not take anything away from Canadian operators. I'm a Canadian operator. But he was it's like he almost like saw a little bit into the future to be like, okay, after the hype is gone, we're gonna need to make some money. So like, let's start focusing on that, which was very aligned with what we were talking about at the time. So I meet him on November 9th for the first time. He flies down from New York to come see us. And I know in the back of my mind, if we get to the end of November, we're out of cash. So
to be clear, you're not selling any weed yet. It's still building.
We have produced weed, and we've probably like maybe made our first shipment out the door. But like, it's not like we might have made, a couple $1,000s every month. Not like the revenue was not there.
Okay. Hence why you're running out of money.
Hence why we're running out of money, and we're hiring like crazy, right? This is all. Again, we were one of the first ones out the door, so none of the automation had been there. None of the processes were intact. We would make mistakes, and we wouldn't know we made it for like a month or two until like the plans came out and be like, why do these look weird? And then we'd have to like start all over. But it's
November 9th.
If you can stomach it, it's amazing. It's painful when you've got like a gun to your head, like from a money perspective. So I meet Jason on November 9th. He comes to the facility. We talk to him. We hit it off. He actually hit it off way better with my partner, Michael Nashit, because they're both pharmacists and they're really like science-y together. So it was like a match made in heaven. And so November 9th, we meet, we talk about it. And just as a sidetrack, Mike, VJ, and I separately, along with our board, we knew that Canada was going to become oversaturated. We knew it was early days, and there was still recreational cannabis coming. But we're like, if we did the math properly, all the analyst reports were like, you need 1 million kilos of cannabis to serve the Canadian market, and we were on track as a market to produce 10 million kilos.
Wow!
So we knew that this thing was going to crash. But we're like, but the U.S. doesn't look like that. So we're like, we want to take money from here and take a public platform and go start doing things in the US. So when Jason came, it was like very serendipitous. So we start talking about this, and he had the exact same point of view that we do, but probably even more thought out. So he calls me, we meet on November 9th. We walk him through our plan. We give him the tour of the facility. He meets VJ, Mike, and myself. Everything is good. Gets back home, calls me at like 11 o'clock on November 9th. And he's like, hey, I like you guys. We're in. I'm like, we're in. I'm like, bro, I just met you. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, how much are you gonna be in for? Like, I'm thinking like he's gonna put like $1 million, $2 million. He's like, I'm gonna put in $25 million. I'm like, deal. I'm like on the spot. I'm like, let's go.
Okay, but at what valuation and what dilution did you guys have to take on that?
We had agreed on $1 a share. Let me tell you things in price per share.
Yeah.
The first round that we did, Family and Friends, was roughly 25 cents a share. We converted the hedge fund at 75 cents a share. He was coming in at $1.05 a share. But the conversion to him coming in was like a couple months. So just the fact that we were showing that much appreciation was great. All of our founding investors, our seed investors were getting a 4x multiple. We knew we were doing well on the valuation side. And at $1.05 a share, there was 40 million. There was 40 million in the till, 40 million issued and outstanding. It was roughly 80 million total shares. So we were at like an $85 million valuation all in, fully done.
And again, you issued new shares in order to sell the $25 million.
Correct. So the concept was going to be that this wasn't a change of control transaction. We still owned, Mike, VJ, and I still had enough to control the shares between us and our founding, like that first $6 million worth of shares that we sold. We still had more than 50% of the company, so we knew we were good. The high watermark in terms of us giving up control was as if it would have been if I issued $40 million worth of shares at that 105 valuation. So I get on the phone with him. I'm like, let me just call you back real quick. I call Mike and VJ. We have like an emergency board session. I'm like, hey guys, this is the deal on the table. And this is like 11 o'clock on the day that I met him. And he's like, and so I'm like, okay, we're cool. It's hilarious. It's easy to get Mike and VJ on the phone, but it's not that easy to get Rick or Gopal on the phone, or our two other board members. But they were there for us, so we're appreciative. So I call him back. I'm like, deal, we're in. Calls me back the next day, November 10th, and he's like, hey, something's changed. I'm like, of course, too good to be true. He's like, I need to tell you something. In the background, I was doing a deal. Canopy had wanted to do a deal with me. This is like when Canopy was still like King of the Hill.
Yeah, it's for our listeners. Canopy is one of the pioneering companies in the cannabis space in Canada, where they check your stock.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. Yeah. Check it out on.
At one point, they were worth like $15 billion, but that's not it anymore.
Yeah.
And so he's like, Canopy wants to do this deal with me, and when I told him I was doing this, I can't be active on both. And I'm like, okay, great. Here comes the bottom. He's like, so Canopy's going to come invest with me in your company. I'm like, and in my mind, I'm just thinking think about the press release that I'm about, that if this goes through, it's like we took down probably the largest non-broker private placement in cannabis, and it's coming from the two most prolific private and public entities in the space. I'm like, I don't know what I did in a past life, but God is really shining down on us. So thank you. And again, he's below my $40 million change of control criteria.
And explain that. I need to understand. So the $6 million that you raised, friends and family. So these are literally friends and family of yours, where you are controlling their voting effectively. If you say, look, let's vote for this, it's rubber stamped, basically.
Yeah, we would all vote in a pack. They were investing in either VJ, Mike, or myself. It had nothing to do with cannabis whatsoever. So they were following our lead regardless of what we did. Not that they're we still have to explain to them and tell them why we're doing what we're doing, but they were very supportive of us in terms of voting their shares our way.
Got it.
And so I hear this $35 million. He's like, we're going to come in for $35 million. I'm like, honestly, whatever. That's fine. And then so we hang up the phone. I'm like, my only condition is going to be, I need to finish this deal by November 15th. November 15th was a big day because there's a big cannabis conference in Vegas that everybody goes to, or everybody did go to back then. And I knew that if we got to that conference without having a deal, and we were in a weird confidentiality phase, we wouldn't be able to act properly at the conference, and we might lose momentum because everybody, pre and post conference, things might change. So I'm like, I need to get this done by the 15th. So I told them, I'm like, we will do your deal, but we need to have paper signed, fully binding paper signed by the 15th. So 4 days.
What was Jason's reaction to that?
He said, let's go. Because it was a simple transaction that we'd done before. It's not like we had to recreate paperwork. We were just issuing new shares of an existing company. We weren't creating a second class. It was a relatively easy transaction to do in comparison to ones that we had done before very recently. So he's like, okay, let me talk to my people. He calls me back. He's like, okay, we're in. I'm like, great. The 12th, he calls me back. He's like, I hate to do this, man, but I got some news. I'm like, what? I'm like, guy, you play with my emotions. And so he's like, when Canopy and I told Canopy Rivers, which was a joint venture that they'd made together, like an investing arm that Canopy and Jason Wild had built together, found out that we were doing this. They want to be in on the deal too. So now we want to put in more money, but this is going to change. So I'm like, okay, how much do you guys want to put in? They're like, we want to put in $52.5 million. And I'm like, that's a big number. But immediately I knew that they wanted control. So I asked him, I'm like, you guys are going to be taking control of the company. He's like, yeah, but we don't want to change anything. We want you guys to continue to run it. We just want to have the final say. If we're going to put this much money and our names and our reputations behind it, we want to have a little bit more control. That's when the ego and the confusion parts of selling a business that you've created or that you're on the path to creating started to kick in for me, because although I knew that we would, even if we kept our management positions, we weren't going to be in the driver's seat. And these are very strong-willed, opinionated people that we were getting into bed with. And we have to be able to put our egos down and say, okay, we're going to listen to what you say, even if it's not what we agree with. Not that that was ever the case, but learning to accept that and to just ultimately sell your business. That was a big thing for me personally. So we had another emergency board session, this time in person, and I'll never forget it. The two non-management board members, Rick and Gopal, Rick took me aside and he's like, listen, I know what you're probably feeling, and that you think you can take this on alone or that you're going to raise this capital, but you have to make a very clear distinction to separate your emotions and what's good for Basem versus what's good for your shareholders. And depending on the decision that you make, your life and your relationship with with the people that you brought into this thing will change for better or worse. Right. And
why? What was he? What could possibly? The decision was to accept the $52 million investment, issue more shares, dilute yourselves from the controlling position.
Correct.
Or not do the deal. And so, what was he sort of pointing out? Did he think there was a conflict of interest between what was good for you and what was good for your shareholders? I'm not clear.
So that's a great question. The piece that I forgot to mention was that we had at that point, we'd had a secondary deal because that wasn't the only deal we were working on. It was actually very much like a dark horse deal that we've been working on. What we'd actually been trying to do was work with investment bankers to raise $25 million by getting into long-term manufacturing agreements with some of the bigger players in the industry who could then fund our growth. But we'd then be a subsidiary of others, but we'd still be in control and we'd still have our own thing. So just two very different paths to take. And one would leave us in control and allow us to be the masters of our own domain. Whereas the other one, we were going to take on some very sophisticated senior partners who had a aligned but specific goal for how they want to see this business grow.
And Rick and Gopal, did they have a point of view on which option you should choose?
I think we all knew that we should pick the one where we were getting equity and credibility and notoriety, which was doing the Jason Canopy deal. But they were very respectful in letting us come to our own decisions. They're like, we'll support you guys with whatever you do, but you need to understand, this is what it looks like from this end. This is what it looks like from this end. And being able to have somebody take you out of your mindset, especially in those 5 days. I can't say I was myself. I have a million things flying through my mind. I'm not 100% sure I'm making the right decision, but I know whatever decision I'm going to make is going to change my life, or change not just my life, our lives as founders, our investors' lives, and the company's like path forward. And
Basem, let me just see if I understand as well. What is the deal for you guys? Because again, at this point, you still controlling around 10% of the company, but presumably if you go to sell this 52 million now, you
down to like 5%.
What's that?
We'd be down to like 5%.
Down to 5%. But you're not getting cash. This is issuing new shares, so there's not a secondary involved. You're now just a minority shareholder effectively in this publicly traded entity that's now controlled by this high-flying guy named Jason and Canopy and like that. So what was the deal that was on the table for you guys? Were you able to sell any of your shares, or did they want to buy any of them, or what was that like?
I mean, the one thing that we did negotiate for ourselves was like, if we're going to go change of control and we don't see eye to eye, we're not going to lock ourselves into like management agreements or like if we quit, we can start selling the next day.
But it was required that you quit.
Pardon?
It was required that you quit in order to sell your shares. If you were an employee, you couldn't sell.
I mean, you could, but then you have to file insider reporting, and then that usually has a very negative effect on your stock. So like the general understanding was, if you're going to sell, let's do it in an orderly fashion. We'll have a good exit, and then you can go sell whatever you need to do. But that wasn't really on our mind because the stock was still trading at, like before we did the deal, and this is kind of the crazy part, before we did the deal, the stock was trading around like $1, right? And so, and then literally the day we announced the deal. So long story short, we end up doing the deal with them, $52.5 million. It becomes the largest non-broker private placement in cannabis. Still probably top 3 in the industry today. And we did it on November 15th. The funny thing was just the way the timing worked. I like pressed send on the press release to get it released. And then we boarded a plane to Vegas with all of our industry peers, right? So we all land and our phones are starting to blow up with the press release. And we didn't know that was going to happen. So like I'm sitting in my bed, I think I might have been sleeping because I was tired. And like people are like tapping me on the shoulder, like, dude, that's the craziest thing, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, how do you guys know this? I'm like, what happened? So we do that deal. It was like the best version of that Vegas trip that we could have taken. And then from there, like the real work started of like implementing it and integrating a business where we don't have control anymore. Anecdotally, we were trading at $1. The minute that got press released, the next day that it opened for trading, it went to like $3 immediately. On its way up to over it very systematically went up from there over like a 18-month period to like something like $18 a share.
Wow.
Yeah. So my 5%, and that when it was $18, it was probably a $2 billion company. Now the company, and this is a lot of credit to like Jason and his team, not a lot, all the credit to Jason and his team, because they basically moved our focus into the US. And we helped them transition the business and the operations as much as we could into that US component, because the US was still coming online. And I think the company does like over $300 million USD in revenue now, and its margins are like 50%. So we are a top 5 global cannabis producer. I don't say this facetiously, but we do have more revenues than Canopy or any other Canadian operator, which is kind of like an ironic twist of how this all went down. And then from November 15th until probably November 15th the following year, what we realized really quickly is that I was probably not the best person to run the business from that point onwards, but Mike was, right? And Mike was more technically focused. He had a much better eye for regulations, especially because we were going state to state, and he had U.S. experience in the pharmacy industry. And again, like him and Jason were like really tight. So I sat on the board for a year. I transitioned everything that I could, and then I respectfully bowed out of the board to allow myself to start selling some of my shares. And then I sold I just very, very quietly and like uneventfully sold a portion of my position to allow myself and my family to kind of level up a little bit. We didn't, like I said, we didn't really come from money, so this was like a very big life changing experience for me and for us. And then I went back into real estate, doing full blown development. I build apartment buildings and condo buildings.
So how much of your shares have you sold now? Like, do you still of all the shares you had? What proportion have you sold versus retained?
Yeah, I sold like 2/3 of my position. I will say, I know most people will ask me this anyways, and it's taboo to talk about money, but I'm happy to share because this is a learning experience for anybody that wants to go through something like this. I personally sold that 2/3 for probably north of, I don't know, let's say like $25 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But I still got a third. The cannabis stocks are in the shits right now. So like I have no intention of selling, but the intention was always to sell 2/3 to, take care of my family, relaunch my real estate business in a much larger version than the one I left it. Before we were doing, 10s and 20s of units at a time. Now we're doing, like, we have 4 towers and 1,500 units under construction. So, and we do ground up to construction. So it's a completely different world. And then the last bit was going to be held until U.S. legalization, which is still kind of the strategy. We think that the market in general and where TerrAscend is positioned specifically, I think there's going to be a few days where we might go north of 20. And then if they do that right, that last third will be probably worth double what I sold the first 2/3 for.
Wouldn't that be an amazing ironic twist? What a story! It's incredible. Again, just given timing and the work that you did to get in a position to be successful, it's incredible. Are you up for a quick lightning round before I let you go?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so you've raised a truckload of money from different sources and different people. What was the slimiest trick an investor or acquirer tried to play on you?
The slimiest trick. We didn't accept this, but somebody tried to sneak into the paperwork when on a deal that didn't go through, that their shares would be worth like 10-1 of ours, off of like some weird trigger. And it was only because our lawyers caught it, but it was never in the term sheet. It was never in anything. And it was like a real, like, I need to take a bath after I have this conversation with you kind of person. So that was like the cheesiest thing that somebody's ever done. So like, I would say that a lesson I learned there was read every single document, regardless how boring it is, because once you sign, it's really hard to take back.
Yeah, what a great lesson in the sleazy trick. What was the biggest mistake you made during the sale process? And so I'll have you narrow down on terms of like the Jason deal, the change of control, like that period. If you had a mulligan, a do-over, what would you do differently during that period?
Well, thankfully, that whole experience went really well. So I don't have a lot of regrets from there. I would say the thing I would do differently with hindsight as experience is I would want to have a conversation with myself to manage my own expectation. Because the one thing that did happen after I did that was unpopular conversation here, but I went through depression because I sold something that defined me. And I didn't have a purpose for a few months or like the better part of a year after I sold it. I would have loved to have given myself advice to like be kinder to myself through and after this process. And that's something that it was a really good learning experience. But it was painful and like as most growth is. So I would have liked to have managed my own expectations as to what that is and to control your ego.
Some people listening maybe really surprised to hear you say that, in the sense that this is an unbelievable financial outcome given the circumstances. Help them square how you became depressed after selling for such an incredible amount of money.
In my experience, I've built 3 businesses up to this point in my life. In my experience, for any business to take off successfully financially, or to have any kind of success whatsoever, it takes a piece of you, right? It really does. You really do have to put blood, sweat, and tears. You're not going to phone it in and it's going to become successful. The odds of that happening are zero, next to zero. And so something I was working at, 18, 20-hour days, 7 days a week, nonstop thinking about, lived, breathed, died, stressed it, like had back problems because of it, like all of that. And then one day it's there, it's yours. And the next day it's like, buddy, like sit in the back and enjoy the ride. It was a really hard transition for me, because you go from a position of power and authority, to not. And then you realize, and this was like a very important life lesson for me, is that it wasn't the money that I was chasing. It's like money is a part of it, but it's like money and power and respect and like, and a sense of achievement, a sense of accomplishment. So once you give all of that up, and especially because it happened so quickly in our story, I didn't have time to adjust. I didn't have, like my advisors didn't even know to tell me like, hey, be prepared for what's coming. Right. So that was, it wasn't that it wasn't a great result. It was fantastic. It's just, I put so much weight on what I thought money would do for me in my life, that once I got it, I was like, I still have to live and be a good human and like support my family and be a member of a community. And so, and none of that was achieved through this, but I just spent, the past 5 years of my life and like, I don't know, probably took years off of my life anyways, doing it to get to this point. It was just a mismanagement of my own expectations as to what happens after that sale. Like after the check is in your account, whatever the version of your selling is, you come to this point where you're like, okay, I'm not nearly as busy as I once was. I need to rebalance my life. And that hit me all really quickly with a lot of emotion. That took me months to process.
What was the best tool for you to kind of get back on track after a period of depression? Was there a book or a course or a therapist or something that you did?
Your book is actually really good for stuff like that. There's also The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck was a really good like reset in my perspective. One that had nothing to do with business, but that was really good in terms of giving me perspective was Sapiens. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
I've heard of it, but I have not read it. Yeah.
It has nothing to do with business. It's just more like to give you like a chronology of like the world.
Human existence.
So, and then like reflection, like understanding that this is a point in your life and that you have a lot more time to redefine what's the next thing. It was more like I had a hard time letting go of what was to make room for what could be. So that was like, but reading helped, exercising helped. I started taking up exercising and my personal health much more seriously. And then having conversations with high value people, people that have gone through things that I've gone through, or that I wanted to learn from. And then finally giving back, like not making it about me. Once you realize that the world doesn't revolve around you, at least for me, it was a very eye-opening experience to accept the fact that if you're in a position where God has blessed you to the point where on like Maslow's hierarchy, you're not like surviving and you're in like self-actualization and like all that stuff. You got like, at least for me, I felt like you have to give back. Like the world works its best when we are one, like a group, and we're helping each other. So those are kind of the tools that help me overcome that.
Fantastic. Notwithstanding the importance of giving back, because I agree that that's an important part of the equation. I do like to hear that people buy themselves some sort of physical trophy to commemorate the win. Please tell me you bought something. You're covering your eyes. What did you buy, or what things did you buy? What category of things did you buy?
Okay, I'll start with the little one. I bought myself. I'm a huge car guy, and I'm a big Fast and the Furious fan. So I bought myself the 1997 Toyota Supra, like a left-hand drive, twin turbo, target top. Like it's like a whole thing.
Wow.
And I bought it stock, and I'm over years souping it up myself. So that was like my little one. And then my big obnoxious one was my wife and I built our dream home. And it's not, it looks like it belongs on MTV Cribs. But we love
it. This is in Mississauga.
It's in Mississauga.
Nice.
I was like, if the only thing I got out of this was a mortgage-free house, like that would be a bonus. Thank God we got more than that, so we're very blessed. It's just, again, like I think it's a lot of like what I grew up wanting and not having played a very big role in what I spent my first bit of money on. But I think I've like leveled out. I'm not so into material things anymore. I've got like you do it once, twice, 3 times, and you're like, oh, like that feeling is like a day. It doesn't even last that long. But so experiences, doing stuff, yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna track down the left-hand drive 1997 Supra to put in the show notes, because I think that's. Oh,
you just tell me when. I'll drive it right to your place, man.
Nice. Basem, I'm so grateful for you sharing your story. It's an incredible story. One of the real incredible stories in cannabis. I know you've got a huge following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Instagram. We'll put all of your coordinates in the show notes at builttosell.com. Is there a good social platform for folks to reach out to you on? Is there one that your preference?
You hit me up on any one of them. I try to respond to everybody, and you'll get a response from me. Yeah, I like to keep it social. So Instagram, LinkedIn are probably, if you want to DM me on either one of those, I'm available. And then my podcast is not nearly as successful as yours, but it's getting there. We have our own podcast that kind of profiles entrepreneurs and like their journey as well. But it's not like this. This is a very, very good tool for people that are in a very specific phase of their entrepreneurial career or their life cycle. And John, I can't tell you how much like this helps. Like I know, like I've watched your videos before. It's nice to know that you're not alone when you're going through stuff like this.
Well, that's very generous of you to say. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your story in such candor and transparency, because I think people will learn from it. And it's a really neat story. So thanks for doing it.
Thank you so much for having me.